So rule study, La Bataille, Premier, rules, ME. What I can say about this at this point is I think my study of the rules here with my moving some pieces around from the La Bataille des Lignes game, moving some pieces around on a map, I think I'm sold. I am sold. I think I'm sold. But of course, it's these rules. I don't know about the other rules because I did not successfully get into La Bataille d'Orthez a while back with the rules out of that box. So that aside, or I should say all the other rules versions aside, I think these rules, the Premier rules, I think I'm sold. I think I really like it, and I will definitely be getting back to it in the future. But I did want to take one, for now, a look at charging. So rule section 37 here, charge à cheval. I keep saying that wrong. Charge à cheval. The penultimate use of cavalry in the age of Napoleon is the charge à cheval. Charge à cheval. Oh, that's it, because it changes the main vowel there. Charge à cheval. The mounted charge can represent spectacular brilliance or tremendous folly. It often determined victory or defeat. Although cavalry troopers would not break into a gallop until well within the 2x range, once a unit of cavalry took its first steps in a charge, an eerie stillness would come over the field. A great portion of the charge movement was spent building momentum and keeping order. After the charge finally did go in, this momentum carried the cavalry well beyond its own lines, where rout was often its only means of rescue. Remember that the time represented by the charge à cheval segment is relative to the differences between soldiers slogging about on foot and those mounted on horsebacks. Cavalry may either charge in the charge sequence or move in the movement sequence. It may not, however, do both. That seems easy to remember. Only cavalry formations which are in a good morale state and are not tired or exhausted may charge. Makes sense. Tired units may opportunity charge or reaction charge an enemy. All cavalry formations which charge increase their printed movement value by 5. Cavalry may charge as individual regiments or as a group of regiments which are in the same hex. In order to charge a stack of cavalry regiments, a leader of the same nationality who has a cavalry bonus must be in the hex with the stack when the charge à cheval phase begins. All cavalry regiments which begin in a single hex and charge as a stack must remain together throughout the charge segment unless separated by lack of movement points. Cavalry may change their formation at the beginning of the charge, but that formation change costs twice the normal cost for a formation change. It now costs 6 movement points. At no other point during the charge is the unit permitted to change its formation. This change may only occur in the first hex of the unit's charge movement. Okay. Cavalry may not charge into or through dwelling hexes, forests, woods, redoubts, or any other terrain specified as restricted for charges in the individual battle special rules. The charge process, rule number 38. Here is the process for the charge à cheval phase in the chronology of battle. At the beginning of the charge à cheval, designate each cavalry unit or stack of units that will charge. Not until all charges are declared and identified may you proceed with the next step. Each individual charge is resolved separately. Select a cavalry unit or stack and advance the charging unit 1 hex at a time, paying attention to facing, formation, and terrain cost. The first hex entered must be the one directly to the front center of the charging formation. A formation change is only permitted in the second hex. In the event of a line formation, the first hex may be either of the 2 front hexes. Charging cavalry must expend 1 movement increment to change its facing, 1 movement increment per hex side changed. So to 360 would cost 6 movement increments. When charging cavalry comes within 4 hexes or an adjusted range, that is at night, infantry may elect to change formation to square. There must be a line of sight to the cavalry for the infantry, front hex sides, to attempt to form square. Whenever a charging cavalry formation is 2 hexes from any enemy formation for which the cavalry has a line of sight, the charging formation must declare if that enemy formation is the target of the charge. The target must be in a straight line for these 2 movement points. If the enemy formation is not the target of the cavalry charge, the charging unit may continue its movement. However, it may not at any time during the player turn attack the specific unit it passed, not the target. Charging cavalry must move in a straight line for the last 3 hexes of its charge and directly face the infantry it wishes to charge. If the straight line was not maintained for the last 3 hexes, it may melee the enemy formation, but without any charge benefits to melee or morale, or detriments to the declared infantry target. Infantry has only 2 options in the face of a cavalry charge, when declared the target. So 2 options. 1, the infantry attempts to stand in its current order when contacted by the charging cavalry. Or 2, the infantry attempts to form carré or square at a variety of hex distances. If the infantry elects to stand in its current order, the cavalry completes the charge move and ends that move adjacent to the infantry. At this point, the infantry makes a modified morale check. Any time an infantry formation is charged by cavalry and the infantry does not elect to enter square, the infantry will have the following modifications made to its morale check. See the cavalry charge morale modifiers located in the special rules of each game. Okay. If the infantry succeeds in this check, the cavalry charge is halted. Infantry in this case are considered to have passed their pre-melee morale check, and things stop until the defensive fire phase. The cavalry attacks at this point and the infantry is not in square. The cavalry will have its assault value doubled if it has charged in a straight line for the last 3 hexes. Option 2. If the infantry attempts to form square, the infantry must state its intent. This may happen at any time there is a charging enemy cavalry unit within 4 hexes of the infantry. An infantry formation may only attempt to form square once per charge sequence. The infantry may not attempt to form square if it does not have a line of sight to the cavalry as defined within the line of sight rules. Okay, infantry formed square. If it was not the declared target of a charge, the infantry stands. Wonder what that's supposed to mean. The cavalry may charge other units, move over the top of the square, and through the square move to another hex or hexes, accepting defensive fire, move in another direction, or halt. Okay. If the infantry was a declared target, the cavalry must advance until it is adjacent to the infantry square. Then the cavalry moves on top of the square and suffers defensive fire, and charge movement ends. Once in hex with the square, cavalry must suffer defensive fire according to the defensive fire rules. After suffering any ill effects of the defensive fire, the cavalry must melee the defensive square in the melee phase. If the melee result has the square disordering, it must retreat 3 hexes and lose an increment for each zone exited. If the result is blank, the cavalry attacker must retreat 1 hex. That sounds like an exception. Infantry disordered. If not the declared target of a charge, the infantry disorder is in place. The cavalry may move adjacent or move to another location. This ends the charge. Neither unit may move in the movement segment. Infantry routed. The cavalry rolls to recall rather than following the routing infantry. Cavalry may attempt to recall only once during the charge by rolling. See recall chart in the special rules for each game. At the conclusion of any charge and melee sequence, cavalry that charged and assaulted an enemy will be exhausted. So they'll be marked exhausted. When charging combat formations in road advantage, the target are always routed, and any formation adjacent to the target must check morale. When charging combat formations in road advantage. Cavalry which charges that could have contacted an enemy unit and fails to do so for melee automatically routes. in the final hex of its movement and stands in place, the unit does not move away from the enemy. The intent is not to have cavalry declaring charges and then maneuvering around but not attacking anything. Okay. At this time, the charge phase for these units have ended, and both the infantry and cavalry are routed in place. Additionally, the cavalry is exhausted. Cavalry may charge other cavalry, but there is no morale check to stand. The charging cavalry will have its assault value doubled if it has charged in a straight line for the last 3 hexes if the defender elects to stand. However, if the defending cavalry successfully reaction charges, there is not doubling of melee factors for going in a 3-hex straight line. Some mutual understanding. Okay. Oh, okay. Determining, I guess, straight line. Reaction charge. Rule number 39. This is a reaction to charging cavalry. All cavalry in good order have an extended zone of influence during the charge à cheval segment of the chronology of battle. This zone is called the reaction charge zone. Only one reaction charge attempt is permitted per cavalry formation, per enemy charge segment, per turn of the chronology of battle. Reaction charges are only permitted within the reaction zones of the cavalry formation. This zone does not increase as the reacting unit moves forward. Whenever an enemy cavalry formation charges into or within this reaction zone, the defending cavalry, which has a line of sight to the charging cavalry, may attempt a reaction charge as follows. If this the reacting cavalry must make a successful morale check. If this check is successful, then the reacting cavalry formation moves 1 hex forward through through one of its front hexes. The enemy formation now moves 1 hex at a time through its charge. Reacting units thereafter pay movement, including facing changes, costs in the same manner as the charging units. This process continues with the 2 cavalry units alternating hexes until they are adjacent to each other or not. Use common sense and movement point costs in this sequence. Reacting cavalry may only move 4 hexes if light and 3 hexes if heavy. If the 2 enemies come adjacent, all charge or reaction charge movement stops, and it is time to proceed with other charges, movement, melee, morale, etc. Reaction charges are just part of the charge sequence. If the 2 enemies do not come adjacent and the reacting cavalry has expended all its movement increments, the phasing player continues the charge, and the reacting cavalry halts and will be tired at the end of the phasing player's turn. Okay, cavalry units which fail to pass their morale check in an attempt to reaction charge merely stand where they are in good order. There is no loss in readiness. If the defending cavalry successfully reaction charges, there is no doubling of melee factors for going in a 3-hex straight line. There is no +5 movement bonus for reaction charge. The reacting cavalry may not attack any other unit. Opportunity charge. Rule number 40. An opportunity charge may occur whenever an enemy combat formation during the movement phase comes adjacent to the normal zone of influence of a cavalry formation in good order, 2 hexes away. When the non-phasing player elects to make an opportunity charge, the defending cavalry unit checks morale. Infantry and artillery may not attempt to change their organizational status when contacted by an opportunity charge. The same process found in the regular charge sequence is used for the infantry or artillery that attempts to stand. Attacking players' cavalry units that move into the opportunity charge zone once contacted just stand. Okay, melee assault between 2 units is mandatory, and at the completion of the melee, the cavalry is exhausted. Cavalry units that opportunity charge and only use 1/3 melee are tired and not exhausted. Skirmisher only. If a skirmisher moves adjacent to a cavalry zone of influence and the cavalry opportunity charges, the skirmisher would have to check morale. Cavalry units which fail to pass their morale check in an attempt to opportunity charge, notice staying where they are in good order. Okay. Cavalry charges and artillery, rule number 41. If the artillery is alone and it is limbered, and cavalry charges the formation and comes in contact with it, the guns automatically rout away their movement value, losing an increment. If the charging cavalry can actually come in contact with the Plusgran disordered artillery that is alone, the artillery is eliminated. If the artillery is alone in a hex and is unlimbered, bringing the charging cavalry adjacent to the guns, if it is in a front hex of the guns, make a modified morale check with the artillery, and if the guns succeed in passing their check, proceed to defensive fire, then melee in the appropriate phase. Alright. And if artillery is alone in a hex and is unlimbered, bring the charging cavalry adjacent to the guns. If it is not in a front hex, make a modified morale check with the artillery, and if the guns succeed in passing their check, proceed to melee in the appropriate phase. Okay, if the guns fail their check, they are eliminated from play, and the charging cavalry may continue their charge. Okay, when the artillery is in a hex with accompanying infantry, okay. If the charging cavalry can actually come in contact with the Plusgran disordered artillery that is alone, the artillery is eliminated. If the artillery is unlimbered, alright, so these are a bunch of various cases, subcases. Cavalry recall, rule number 42. The phasing player that is charging will encounter enemy infantry artillery formations as the target of a charge. They elect to stand or attempt to form square. Units that disorder or rout as a result of a charge are not allowed to voluntarily move when the current defender becomes the phasing player. When infantry routs, as stated above, as a result of a charge, that charging cavalry must roll for recall. Okay. If cavalry recall is unsuccessful, the cavalry must expand its remaining movement points to make every effort to move adjacent to the routing unit and melee the first enemy unit the cavalry becomes adjacent to, even if that is not the target of the charge. Units may not make formation change while force marching. Units may not make a formation change while force marching. Add 12 to their printed morale if charged by cavalry, and may not engage in fire or melee combat as the attacker in the turn they force march. And reinforcements may not charge onto the board.